It has been said that history is the record of the collective consciousness, a catalogue of events remembered and preserved by the participants.
It must have been real early. I don't think there was 1,000. And then orchards. I think Uncle Tom was, that's T.W. Sterling. He was responsible for that. He started Bankhead. And that was the big pear orchard. He started pears.
Although the story of a parish may sometimes be seen as a linear procession of names, dates, locations, and bequests, it is much more than that. It is colored by the people who were a part of that procession and the memories that they choose to carry with them.
He was all Irish, all the way back. More fun, you know. Oh, he really was. He could be strict. Yes, he was a real clergyman. But that didn't stop him. You know, there's some that are more so than others. You know, I don't know, I can't explain it. Maybe it's because it's the only one I knew.
At the turn of the century, the population of Kelowna was little better than 250. Ranchers, fruit farmers. The first Anglican church in the Kelowna area had been built and consecrated in 1895. Services were held once a month by the Reverend Thomas Green, who traveled from Penticton, where he was based. In 1897, Mr. Green with his family moved to Kelowna to take up duties as the rector of the new parish of St. Michael and All Angels.
There was lots to do. I mean, we made our own fun, of course. We had friends. And then we went camping every summer down at the mission, the Walker's place. In fact, our cabin was called Parson's Pleasure.
The new Diocese of Kootenay was formed in 1903, and by 1906, the little parish had grown to the point where there was talk of either enlarging the present structure or rebuilding in a new location. Subsequently, property on Richter Street was purchased by the parish vestry. A suitable building was designed. Construction began, and on July 30th, 1911, the cornerstone was laid by W.A. Taylor. It was a good beginning. Estimated cost, $20,000. It was a handsome building. Local stone, granite from quarries up the lake, interior of coast fir. There would be changes and additions over the years, but the main fabric of the building would remain the same. A handsome church. The settlement was young and enthusiastic. They were pioneers, looking for a new start and the excitement of setting their foot upon the land beyond the hill. They were the builders, the growers, the ones who follow in the wake of the map makers, and they were a hardy breed.
A lot of them came from England, Scotland, Ireland, Eastern Canada. And there were a lot of Italians and French.
And their clergy? A similar stock with a need to serve, to go where they were called and be of use. Thomas Green was the pioneer, the builder, the pastor. He did what needed to be done to weld the parish into a unit that would bring forth futures.
Oh, he was loved by the whole community. It didn't matter who you were. You didn't have to be Anglican. He took care of everybody if they needed it. The old days, there weren't very many people there.
There was the 8 and 11 and 7:30. And then there'd be some times in between there'd be a service. But I know around Easter or Christmas, my father used to get up at 6 and he'd go to the hospital. Then he'd come back and there'd be 2 services at church, 7 and 8. And then 11. There'd be Sunday school somewhere along there. And then again at night. Usually on Christmas they used to have an afternoon service. but it was pretty hectic. We had a late tea in the afternoon on Sundays, and then after the service at night, we always had a sort of supper party or somebody come in.
He was made Archdeacon of the Okanagan in 1916, a position he held until his death in 1935. By 1924, his duties as Archdeacon for the whole of the Okanagan area would cause him to hand over the role of pastor of St. Michael's Parish to another. In 1922, the Reverend Charles E. Davis had arrived from Golden to be the Archdeacon's assistant, and thus in 1924 it was a natural transition that he should take over as rector of the parish. His wit, his knowledge of church music, his sense of discipline and choir direction, his talent for the training of untrained voices, as well as many other gifts and capabilities, will long be remembered.
Mr. Davis had a marvelous way with voices, and particularly boys' voices. He had been, I understand, a scout leader in the old country, in Ireland. And this love for youth, as it were, carried on. And when he started the choir, he naturally wanted choir boys as well as seniors in the choir. And we learned by rote, really, because I didn't read music. But he would pound it out on the piano, and away we'd go.
During his tenure, the present organ was installed and a parish hall was built. He was leader of the famous St. Michael's Boys Choir and was a very strict choir master.
We all called him Sir. It was just understood. Behind his back we called him Charles Edward, but to his face we called him Sir, and no one minded. It wasn't something that one took umbrage at. It was just something you did. And he, as I say, he had a great way with bringing out the best in one's voice, but also probably the things I remember most about him were the trips, the annual choir camps that we went to. He was also keenly competitive. He would come down from the pulpit and direct the choir if we were perhaps doing an anthem. The choir itself had a great reputation, and there was usually a waiting list of certainly boys wanting to come into the choir. And if you didn't have a voice, there were no crows in that choir. They were all good voices.
Well, I remember him as the father of my girlfriend, who was Biddy Davis, his daughter, and that he had a very fine boys' choir that sang in St. Michael's all the time, always looking very angelic in church, but I knew some of the boys. He also was very concerned for the boys and their activities away from the church. He was concerned with their home life and their whole environment. He took them fishing. He really loved his boys. His girls tagged along on the fishing trips sometimes, but mostly it was the boys. And it was up to Beaver Lake when the road was a one-way track with switchbacks, and his car invariably failed on the way up. He was the world's worst driver. When parked on Bernard Avenue, he just backed out. He didn't look to see if anybody was around behind him or not. He just backed out, you know. They've got to get out of the way.
Kennan Davis retired in 1942, and the Venerable Desmond Catchpole from Rossland, BC, was appointed to replace him. Davis continued his role as choir director for another 2 years until his death in 1944.
The choir became quite famous, and Kelowna was very proud of it. They took prizes in the local competition. They took prizes provincially, which was really a feather in their cap for such a small town. Say he probably influenced a lot of boys in this town through the choir.
Kelowna had enjoyed a slow but steady growth from 1,600 in 1911 to 5,100 in 41. It was not in the path of the gold rush, and so had escaped the boom and bust of that era. It was the land that attracted the people, and the land will not be rushed. Seasons come and go, and it is enough that there is a harvest to gather in. The next 25 years would see all that changed. Population would more than triple to 17,000 by 1966. The war would end. Men would come home. The quiet and rural nature of the community would change. In those years of flux and change, the parish would need leadership with sound administrative skills, and they found it in the person of Archdeacon Catchpole, who arrived on the scene in 1942 and held the rector's chair until 1967.
He didn't pull any punches. He called a spade, and if there was a cause to be fought for, well, he certainly didn't mind standing up and being counted.
He took a lot to get to know. He was hard to get to know or to get close to. I think it was easier for adults, perhaps, than children. After I grew up, I got to understand and like him, and I could sit down and talk to him. But growing up, we didn't really have, too much in common. He was a very opinionated person, and spoke his mind. But he would back up what he said if he thought something needed to be rectified or corrected.
Yeah.
He not only spoke out against it, but he did something about it.
Under the active leadership of Archdeacon Catchpole, the new parish hall was completed in 1950, providing people with much-needed space for the growing number of activities that were becoming a part of the parish life. A new rectory was finally built, and many beautiful vestments and other adornments for parish worship were obtained. In 1967, the Venerable Archdeacon retired, and the Reverend Fraser Berry from Winnipeg was appointed rector.
St. Michael's was, I would describe it as beautifully run, ideal, perfect Anglican parish, Victorian, well organized, beautifully set up in the church, and a good, solid Anglican parish. Many of the people with whom I had conversations with before coming, and when I was being interviewed and was looking at St. Michael's, we were talking about bringing the parish into a different era, if I may put it that way. And I saw that there were several things to be done. One was to do something about involving the total parish in worship, specifically at that time children and young people in worship, and that led to working at developing 9:15 or 9:30 parish Eucharist. The other was to become concerned about those who were outside of the parish. Think about that era. That was when we had everybody on the road. Hitchhikers left, right, and center. And when they hit Kelowna, there was no place to stay. And our parish hall was tighter than a drum. Couldn't get in there. And I always remember some pretty hot and heavy church committee meetings talking about the possibility that we might have a youth hostel. Wow. And anyway, eventually we did. We then opened up, and that was a very exciting development in the life of the parish, because it caused us to examine ourselves and say, what are these buildings for?
Though his tenure as rector was brief, his election as the 7th Bishop of Kootenay in 1972 allowed him to see the work in those two major areas continue and evolve further. In the spirit of the Church's renewed understanding of the liturgy, the freestanding altar became acceptable. Through the sharing of parish facilities with the wider community, the parish provided leadership in that community. Change and growth does not come without its cost, however. In the changes instituted, there were those who were somewhat upset.
They were not sure that the clergy, and there were others besides myself involved, were behaving in a particularly appropriate Anglican manner. were doing things in a different way. We had the trust of the police and some of the magistrates in town who knew what we were attempting to do and knew that we had a little more trust in that community than anyone else did at that time.
A team ministry with the Reverend Jim McCullum and the Reverend Jack Greenhall was begun in 1972, and 5 years later, McCullum moved out of the diocese, leaving the present rector to carry on. In 1987, the parish church of St. Michael and All Angels achieved a new status. What began as a parish church for an enthusiastic group of settlers and pioneers has now become a cathedral. And what about the parish itself?
St. Michael All Angels Parish has been instrumental in leading in a number of things. For example, in liturgical arts, the development of a liturgical arts guild, and began to develop a real skill in developing liturgical art, the making of vestments, banners, hangings, and so forth. That skill is now being shared with other parts of the diocese. Another very important focal point is education, Christian education. And we've tried to, in a modest way, develop some standards towards in Christian education. Acquired a vision of a new way to be church, in the sense of Christian formation, and in terms of preparation for Christian initiation. So it has 4 stages to it. And there's a stage of pre-evangelism or welcoming. We ask the questions, how can we reach out to the people in the local community around the church? And the second has to do with after people have been welcomed and invited in to share with us what we have, how do we begin to form them in their understanding of the gospel as it relates to their lives, not our lives, but their lives. And then the third stage has to do with initiation itself. All of this, of course, is leading to initiation, baptism, confirmation, Eucharist. And the fourth and final stage is probably one of the most important, is the training for ministry. What do they do with all of this now that they've been led through this 4-stage process? How do you put those ministries into effect in your life?
And now this building, so well begun in 1911 by men of energy and vision, has become the Cathedral Church of the Diocese of Kootenay. It was indeed a good beginning.
As a building, it's still, I think, the loveliest church in Kelowna, and always will be that way in my thinking.
But no matter how beautiful it may be, a church is only a building that stands upon a piece of ground day after day. It is the people of the parish, the people who use it, who see it as a focus for centering on their spiritual life. It is the people who flow in and out of it that give it life. It was a good beginning. May it continue in that tradition as a cathedral parish church.